No sweat?
Yeah, the pizza.
Pizza?
I think I got the
That was- The whole chapter was about pizza.
That's the trick session.
You? Okay, so let's go ahead then. And we got to Philadelphia, right? Did we just right where we quit? Was it here? Did we mention Philadelphia? And Philadelphia fell. Pizza. It is good to know. And you got to hear, oh, so. Why were the Hessians taken by surprise? They were hungover, yeah. And oh, what was the biggest advantage that the Continental Army, the United States had? What did they have to do to win? Yeah, just survive. Stay in the fight. That is the most important thing. And I don't think I mentioned this, so everyone write down somewhere attrition. And I was going to, and I think I was trying to get to the Philadelphia. Attrition, that is where that's where wars are fought. And so many people, when one side, or you try to kill so many people, maim, wound, destroy their infrastructure, destroy their factories, they can no longer fight. So attrition is where one side can no longer fight. They just run out of men, they run out of political will. That's when wars are fought. Everybody, they all say, we're going to fight that big battle, we're going to absolutely brilliant, we'll move our army, and have the, no, it's kill. How many you can take. And that's what they're fighting here. And Britain, how much are they willing to lose to hold on to the colonies? How much are the patriots willing to lose to keep in the fight? Every war is fought like that. And that's why it's so awful. There's always just nightmares. And that's what's happening right now in Ukraine. Right now. Russia is, I don't know. There are massive protests to, they've called out their 300,000 reserves. They're out of reserves. And they've initiated a draft of all young men. And they're absolutely desperate. Their leaders appears to be delusional. And that's what it is right now, a horrible war of attrition. And yes, he's threatening nuclear weapons. And the United States is very worried about it. So I'm now very worried about it. So that's why these wars are always so awful. So we got Philadelphia. The original plan was, did we mention this? They cut off New York. We got to that, right? The General Howe said, no, I'm going to Philadelphia. Oh, what was the battle? What were the two battles that they surprised the Hessians and then hit the British rear guard? What two cities? Yeah, Trenton and Princeton. They weren't big victories, but we could win a battle. We could win a battle. That's huge. And then here it's what's up? Philadelphia fell. The Continental Congress just moved to York. The Continental Army did better at Germantown. Once again, he left his flanks in the air of Brandywine. But back to General Burgoyne. General Burgoyne is advancing south here. Now he had to come all the way from here. In the fall of 1776, a scratch, I mean, they literally made it on the shore. British fleet, so whether ships, they threw some cannon on it. They were trying to take the southern part of Lake Champlain, and they were stopped by a scratch-made fleet under Benedict Arnold again. So the British had to start further back here. As they're advancing here, now the plan was Howe's coming here, but he went to Philadelphia. Burgoyne, the commander of the British forces here, had no idea he was alone until August. And he's kind of stuck out there in the middle of the wilderness. And so he decides, I got to get to Albany for winter quarters. If he's caught out there in the wilderness, he's done. He's got 10,000 men. And yes, they have a long wagon train of supplies, but he has over 30 wagons of just personal gear for himself. He brought 5 rugs, wagon after wagon of wine, supposedly 3 wagons with 3 separate mistresses, but that might not be true. He was thinking this would be an easy campaign, is the point. And so he's advancing here, and we're coming to a series of 3 battles that we lump together as the Battle of Saratoga. October 1777. So there's maybe 1,000 colonial forces that are kind of trained, and then about 9,000 militia under Horatio Gates. Gates was a British officer, immigrated to the United States, to the colonies, and volunteered his service. He wants to be overall command. In fact, they're thinking about putting him in overall command and fire Washington. There's a series of heights right here called the Bemis Heights. And 3 separate times, the British are going to try to take the heights. And General Burgoyne is running out of time. It's fall, it's getting cold, he's out of supplies, and the big thing is he needs shelter for the winter. And so these are kind of desperate attacks. The third attack, almost, in fact, it does arguably break through. They push over the hills, the colonial militia ran, it looked like it was over. The second in command for Gates was Benedict Arnold. And Arnold had been under house arrest. Tent arrest. He was in a tent because he supposedly disobeyed orders. He was pretty cantankerous. Gates didn't like him. And so when the British broke through, Arnold's in his tent. He could see men running away. And he sneaks out of the tent. Maybe his guard ran away too, who knows? He snuck out to try to rally the men. A riderless horse came by. He supposedly grabbed the reins and kind of swung on, turned the horse, reared the horse around, grabbed the musket from a retreating soldier, and waving the end of the musket, so using the butt as kind of a bat, started banging soldiers, rallying them, stop, turn around, let's fight, yelling every obscenity there was, screaming at men. And slowly but surely, this is kind of a watercolor, but men started rallying and just stopped. Here's a picture of him riding through, a painting of it. Enough men stopped. The British were exhausted as they came over the hill. They saw this kind of wavering little line and they just had enough. And the British pulled back. Arnold was horribly wounded, but saved the day. Saved the day. Once again, Benedict Arnold. And this showed, this battle, the U.S. can win. Not just stay in the fight. They might be able to win. And this is going to convince Britain's biggest enemy, France. Oh, Britain's down. Now, France, King Louis XVI wants nothing to do with that whole Declaration of Independence. He could care less. He just wants to get the British. That's all he wants. So, Burgoyne has no choice to surrender. And the French jump in. I should add, this painting right here is at the rotunda of the United States Capitol. So if you walk into the Capitol, it's a massive painting. So if you take a tour of it, you walk through, it's a huge painting. One of the first things you see if you come out from the house side. And most people, they think it's General Washington at Yorktown. But that's Gates, that's Burgoyne. Massive painting, a gift from France. And that's going to lead to the Franco-American alliance. This would be decisive. Because the war went from Britain trying to control its colonies to a world war. Now Britain has to defend its colonies from potential attack in the Caribbean, Canada, India, South Africa, all over. Now it's a world war. Now Britain is stretched thin. Everything changes overnight. And I should add, Spain, still angry at Britain, they jump in too. And the Netherlands jumps in. Well, the Netherlands just declares war on Britain. They don't care about America. The point is now worldwide war. Overnight, everything changed. And remember, the United States has to survive, but they need weapons, they need men, and that's what they get. The French borrow a bunch of money and send it to the United States, weapons, and by 1781, half of Washington's army, French. It's decisive. The United States could not have won trouble without friendship. Because when they have to survive, they needed that help. This would be huge. Yes.
If half of his army was French, he didn't speak French, how did they communicate?
General Rochambeau did. Yeah, that was a French commander, Rochambeau. Yeah, he could speak English, and so they could communicate. But yeah, that's a valid point. So if we're going surrender, everything's different, and the British have to reevaluate their tactics. They're in Philadelphia, New York, and they realize we might lose part of this, but we got to hold the most valuable parts. Well, after this happens, Benedict Arnold, who's horribly wounded, he gets none of the credit. This is the statue. Okay, it became a big thing to make obelisks in the 19th century, and they copied Bunker Hill. Bunker out the first one, and then Washington Monument also copied that down the road. So this statue has the heroes in it. And there's a, right here you see these little windows here for a statue, like here's Gates. Here's Daniel Morgan, the old Wagoneer, was one of the heroes of the battle. And then one of them's just empty. Just empty. Nobody's there. And there's another, on the below, there's another monument to that guy, just a boot. That's how they signify Benedict Arnold. They acknowledge him, I think, in a clever way. They just left it open because we're not going to put a statue to Arnold. Because Arnold, wounded, Gates took the credit. By the way, nose is hard to draw. Arnold, he went back to Philadelphia after the British evacuated the next year. And he met up with loyalist families. And you might think, why would this great patriot do it? Because he felt slighted. He never got the credit. Took him a long time to recover. He never really recovered. His wound that I think, yeah, right here, he survived. He survived, but it, using the terminology of the time, leaked for the rest of his life. You know, and horrible wound. Took a long time to recover then. And this is a painting of him fuming in Philadelphia. Loyalists took advantage of this. Told you this before. Some people slighted, disrespected. It burns and burns. And he was that was his personality. So even though Washington allowed him back in the army, he always felt slighted. In fact, Washington would give him command of one of the most important forts of all the Americas, West Point. It was north of New York on the Hudson River. So here's the Hudson. New York's down here. As long as the Continentals held West Point, the British couldn't use the Hudson to go up and down the river. And it makes a very sharp turn here. There's high cliffs, there's forts and fortified positions, and then they have big, thick chains across the Hudson to keep ships from coming. Here's what the chains look like. They're huge. I mean, they're like this big. So rivers boats can't use it. Arnold, still wounded, still recovering. Washington gave him command of that. Little did Washington know that Arnold, through his loyalist friends in Philadelphia, was intriguing with the British in New York to give them West Point, to pull the defenses down so they could take West Point without a fight. Now, I don't know if this would have turned the tide of the entire war. This is a big deal. West Point was that important of a fort. And it would be at this fort 40 years later, that's the US military academy. Based more than anything else on the French military. Still is West Point. Has anyone been there? It's a beautiful place. On the high cliffs, it's really pretty. Well, this is actually the site where British officer John Andrew was coming up, riding up, and going to meet with Benedict Arnold to literally give the fort away the next day. Arnold or Andre wore a shawl or like a cape over his uniform to try to hide who he was. Now you might think, well, why would you wear a cape and have a uniform underneath it? Because you can see the red, or he's wearing a red uniform. If somebody is caught as a spy and they're wearing civilian clothes, under the rules of war, a spy committing espionage, their punishment is what? Huh? Yeah, death. Yeah, they're going to be executed. If he's in a uniform, he was considered to be a prisoner of war. So that's why he just wore the shawl, so he can say, no, I'm just a soldier. So hopefully he thought, okay, POW camp would be awful, but still not killed. They caught him. Arnold heard about this just seconds before he was going to be arrested and escaped out of West Point, just barely with his life. Made it to New York, joined the British realizing his talent, and he would actually be given command of Loyalist cavalry in Virginia. They're basically the Civil War, Loyalists and Patriots, and would fight the rest of the war. And then would go to London and live out the rest of his life in London. I guess quite happy. Even though I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, told about Benedict Arnold, they said he always forgave betraying his country. Yeah, he was fine. But I love this cartoon from this era showing Arnold. I mentioned the Loyalist cavalry. Here's Arnold, the Two-Face. Arnold, the traitor, gallows for the traitors, and I like the devil. Yeah, I just like that one. So that's why Arnold, just the boot. That's how come Arnold's name is going to be synonymous with treason in the United States. Benedict Arnold. And yeah, Arnold, that's going to be pretty well known around the world. There'll be a World War II trader from Norway called Quisling. That kind of were going to be the same thing. So in the West, the British allied themselves with the Iroquois and other tribes. But the British really didn't send them much aid. They were just hoping to tie American forces down here. And after a horrifically bloody year, 1777 along the frontier, fighting all along the frontier, the Continental Army would send, they called them Rangers, and this was a name after the French and Indian War. And yes, in World War II, the United States would adopt that they copied what British called them commandos. The United States called them Rangers. They're still Rangers today. Kind of training guerrilla fighting and that kind of thing. We're going to jump right to here. To get a claim to the Ohio River, but also to try to drive out the Allies to the British. This is a bloody campaign. In the winter of 1778-79, George Rogers Clark would lead his Rangers. Here's a picture of him. This is in Vincennes in Indiana. Down this river, surprise attacking villages, driving allies of the British out, basically attacking American Indians, whoever they were, to try to get a claim. But this would get a claim for the United States on the Mississippi River. When the treaty is going to be negotiated, they could say, hey, we took it all the way to the Mississippi. And so that's where George Rogers Clark then is going to be kind of lesser known, but a very important component to the United States taking and conquering this land. I should add, some of you might know George Rogers Clark's brother. William Clark. Did someone say Lewis Clark? Oh, you mean Lewis Clark? Yes, William Clark of the Corps Discovery. Yeah. So, with that, the British would adopt reluctantly the Southern strategy. They're stretched thin. And so they decide we'll stay in New York, but we'll move south. They believe there were more loyalists in the South. So they thought if we go in the South, and the word they would say is pacify. So get rid of any patriot activity, control the South. So start down in Charleston, South Carolina, and move north. The thought was, even if we lose New England, we still hold here. And so 1779, they attack Savannah. There'll be a little bit of fighting around here. But that's the plan. Now, this shows really bad thinking by the British, but really common. They confuse Southern kind of neutrality for the war for loyalists. The reason there wasn't a lot of anti-British feeling here is because there were no British soldiers here. There's fighting and British soldiers occupying people's home and marching through here. Not here. The war was very abstract down here. They took the war here, and now people in the South, colonists in the South, they actually have to deal with the British Army. And I wonder if this will backfire. So 1780, Charlestown finally fell. Yes, after the war, they would rename it Charleston. We're not going to have our town named after some British king. But they still want to have Charles in it, so it's Charleston, which all Charleston means is Charlestown, but whatever. They knew there was a Continental Army forming up here, most of the militia. The British commander here, Lord Cornwallis, decided, okay, I knock this army down, it's over, I sweep up here. Okay. That's what his plan was. So they marched, and there's almost no roads. So they have to use basically wagon trails or get food as they marched. Yeah, I wonder who had food. And they march here to meet a Continental Army. Now, the Continental Army had about 8,000 men, most were untrained militia, at Camden. So the British advanced into South Carolina towards Camden. The hero of Saratoga, at least he took all the credit, Horatio Gates had been given command of all Continental armies in the South. He was a direct rival to Washington. He wanted to win a quick victory. So, the British advance under Lord Cornwallis, Gates organizes his men, and Gates, who thought he was brilliant because he was in the British Army, showed what kind of commander he really was because he put his best forces in the middle and the militia on the flanks. Now the British attacked like a sledgehammer, hit the flanks, and what do militia do? They run. They start to run. Gates, seeing that, mounted his horse, grabbed his sword, and ran faster. Took off. Once Gates ran away, the whole Continental line fell apart. And everybody started to run, the British running as fast as they could to chase him. Once again, the only thing that saved that army got dark. Disaster at Camden. But the army's still there. There's still Continental forces there. Gates will be fired. And now the big but, Wallace and his army stuck in the middle of South Carolina, out of supplies. And now he's got to split his forces up to try to round up the remnants of the Continental Army. And this will sow the seeds of their demise. Okay, I defeated them, but they still are there. I got to round them up. Well, this would turn into a disaster. Their supply lines were very long. So they only could bring on wagons, maybe some ammunition. So they'd have to go, the term they would use is called foraging. Foraging meant they would send patrols out with wagons and gather food from local farmers. If these farmers resisted, they burned their farm down, basically saying, oh, don't resist. And steal everything they had set aside for the winter. And there's going to be this kind of mythology of brave South Carolinians standing up to the British, obviously very stylized. But they would burn down farms, take the food, loot and pillage, because that's what soldiers have done time immemorial. And I think you might see the problem. Every time they burn down a farmer's home, the British have created more what? Yeah, more enemies, more patriots. A terrible move. And it was an escalating problem. They create more patriots, they march through, they take the food, and the patriots come behind and say, see what they did, come join us and fight. And there'll be more little battles, hit and run, and the colonial militia, and whoever it might be, started using what they're gonna call 40 years later, about 25 years later, I'm sorry, guerrilla tactics, the kind of tactics been used on the frontier, hit and run. Here's an ambush attack, hit supply lines, go back into the swamps, or act like they're farmers. I love the British, and then take up arms when they go past. And this went on for months. Cornwallis would send smaller units out. Every small unit be ambushed. His main force would come up and the Continental Army would just filter away. The most famous of these guerrilla fighters would be the Swamp Fox, Francis Marion. There's statues, a bunch of statues been in South Carolina. This one's in Charleston. I just kind of like that one. And here's a watercolor, you know, the hiding in the swamp as the British are looking for him. It was quite effective. The British would go out and try to find them, and they just created more enemies. And this will become a pretty common thing in these types of wars. They're trying to pacify their loyalist support. They made more patriots. And then Washington, now confirmed as the commander after Gates's humiliation, Gates would be fired, hang out for a while, then he'd just kind of go back to Britain. Well, Nathaniel Greene, Washington's most talented general, took command. And he started building his army up, training men, and avoided the British. Cornwallis is flailing after him all around this area here, and he just kept retreating. And the British supply lines got longer and longer and longer. Very clever, isn't it? Use the vast space of now the new United States and retreat along the mountains and pull Cornwallis in. By the way, Nathaniel Greene was a Quaker. He was known as the Fighting Quaker. Yes, Quakers are pacifists, so that's like calling him the tall, short guy. But you know what the heck, right? And with that, here are the ragtag militia uniforms they would wear. The British red, and then their elite cavalry that would try to run down the continental militia, they wore green. So the British had two reversals soon after Camden. One at Kings Mountain right here. British cavalry charged into the woods and were basically surrounded by mountain folk, hillbillies. Militia just swarmed and poured out of the mountains and attacked them in this really thick, heavy forest and won a victory. The British retreated. No, it wasn't a major victory. Remember, they don't need major victories. Same thing happened at Cowpens. A small continental force sucked the British into a trap, which I'll show you a little bit later, because the same thing's going to happen to Guilford Courthouse, and defeated another small British force. Yes, Cowpens is a little place in North Carolina, and yes, they pinned the cows there. Thus, Cowpens. And that's leading to the biggie, Guilford Courthouse. Guilford Courthouse would be one of the most decisive battles of the war, because as you can see from this easy to follow map, you got it right. You know what happened? We good? Both sides used really big arrows to fight. I have to draw you a picture. Oh, I should add, that's the actual flag. So the United States had been developing a flag. It was no really set pattern, but it was red, white, and blue, because the Union Jack's red, white, and blue. The Sons of Liberty used red and white stripes to signify the colony, so it used that. And then there was a blue field in the corner with stars, or I'm sorry, a field in the corner with stars representing each new state. Now, if you look at that flag over there, that's called the Betsy Ross flag. Not almost certainly with one of the flags they would use. There was no set rule for where the stars would go. But Betsy Ross probably had nothing to do with it. That's a myth in Philadelphia. But if you go there, we'll be told many times Betsy Ross did the flag. That's the most famous one. But at Guilford Courthouse, there was no real set flag. They just knew red, white, and blue, stripes, 13 stars. Thus, that's the Guilford Courthouse flag. There it is there. I think that's a cool flag, but that's the US flag. The Guilford Flag. Sandwiched between the Civil War era US flag and the flag of the Italian Kingdom of World War I. It's kind of weird. I have a got out the flags. So let me draw you a map. Do you want me to take you to?
Yes.
Who's been to North Carolina? Now you all can say you've been to North Carolina, right? Oh, you have North Carolina. You want to do it? I understand. So I drew a first period, so it's pretty easy to follow, right? So Cornwallis is getting really desperate. He's chasing Greene. Greene won't stop and fight. The men are exhausted. They've been, every time they go in small units, now they're being attacked by guerrillas. And so when Greene finally stops, Cornwallis doesn't hesitate, he attacks. That gives Greene a great advantage. Greene knows I can pick the battlefield. Wherever Greene stops, Cornwallis will attack. So he picks a clearing surrounded by forest. The forest is important, so Cornwallis can't use his superior numbers to outflank. The forest kind of blocks them. So let me draw, okay, field, right? Feel like, all right, good, field.
Yeah.
This is forest. We know it's forest because it's green, right?
Yeah.
How else do we know? We need brown for this. All the forest animals, right? We got a deer. That's deer. Badger. Elf. Land walleye. Yeah, North Carolina's. You've been there, right? You can't shake a stick without hitting the walls.
What about the goats?
The goats? That's a good point. Where are the goats? The goats are the secret weapon. I'll come back to them. So in the middle of this field, there's a slight rise. So this is rise. You don't really notice if you're there, but it's really important. Kind of rises like this and then slopes back down. So somebody standing here can't really see here. Clever, isn't it? And so he knows, and this is exactly what happened to Cowpens. He knows the British men attack. He's line up and go. They can't hesitate. And so Greene has his militia line up in two lines here, and they're ordered to fire 2 shots. And then what do militia always do? Run. And so they'll run away, knowing the British will follow. And then laying down out of sight of the British are about 1,500 trained men who will then pop up. And then in the trees, he put snipers riding goats with hunting rifles. They can't fire very fast, but to pick off officers. The British are very unsporting. Cornwallis, knowing, I've got to get them. They're here. I got to win now. Time is running out. He had his men advance in 2 lines, march to within 40 yards, and their plan was to fire once, fix bayonets, and go. Charging. And so they fire once, the militia fires, and then they take off running. And so the British are like, we got him, and they go running after him. Now these guys all went to the forest to shoot at their flank. The British go charging over the hill, and they lose their ranks because they're just running. You know, the men are just, we got it. Finally, we can end this thing. Ah! They go over the hill. Greene has his men stand up, and they all fire together. That's called a volley. So imagine 1,500 men firing at about 20 yards into the faces of the British soldiers. It just mows them down. And they're just totally shocked. Worked perfectly. And what do the British do? They turn and run away. It looks pretty good, right? But this time, Greene loses control of his men. His men are like, we got him. And they go charging over the hill. And it turns in, this is what we call a melee. Well, the few times you have to see like hand-to-hand combat, I mean, it's just crazy. Cornwallis is watching this and he's like, oh, if he loses there, he's out in the middle of nowhere. His army's done. This could be the war. Cornwallis has about 20 cannon lined up right here. He orders his cannoneers to fire into the melee. His own men and Continental forces. And does anybody know what grape shot is? What is it?
Grape shot is when you take a cannon made with like one large cannonball and you stuff it with a bunch of smaller cannonballs. So
Yeah, they literally have like a burlap bag. They have 12 to 15 balls about that big instead of one cannonball. They stick that in fire, yeah. Can you imagine what that would do to the human body? They're firing about 50 yards. It just ripped it apart. I mean, cut it down like a scythe going through wheat. Just chopped him down, screaming him. And what did Greene do? Greene decided, I did what I needed to do. And he pulled back. Cornwallis won, I guess. He had the battlefield and lost a third of his men. So, tactically, in the short run, this is a victory for the British. They held the battlefield. But the Southern strategy failed. The Southern strategy failed. Has everyone got that? It failed miserably. It was a complete and utter disaster. The British are forced to pull back. And, oh, we got time. And that's going to lead to, did I turn on the projector?
Yes.
Don't you like this flag? Isn't that a cool flag? How many saw that and were wondering what the heck that was? I can't help but go in my room and there it is. I think it's really cool. I've always liked that one. So since that is a US flag, just like that's a US flag, there's still a US flag. Even if they don't have all 50 stars now. And so with that, he retreats to the coast and gets supplies from the Royal Navy and abandons the south. And Cornwallis moves into Virginia, the deep south. The swamp fox. So he fled to the sea, picked up supplies, and went into Virginia and joined the Civil War here. He made one sortie out into Virginia, it failed, and retreated back. It was a disaster. And with that, everything would change. Greene didn't follow. Greene retraced Cornwallis's steps, city by city, village by village, farm by farm, and retook the south. And that is why every place from Virginia down, there are statues of Greene everywhere. Every town he took, there's a statue of Nathaniel Greene. Step by step, eventually finishing in Charleston. So, exactly the right thing to do. So, the Southern strategy created more enemies. It unified much of the colonies against the British. And listen, similar things are going to happen. You know, during the Vietnam War and special topics, and this is almost exactly what the United States is going to do in South Vietnam. And we'll see this elsewhere. Rid of Iraq and Afghanistan. So October 1781, we're coming to Yorktown. Cornwallis decides to retreat to the sea and wait for the Royal Navy to pick him up. He went to James Peninsula, right here. And remember, Jamestown is right there. Yorktown's on the other side of the peninsula from Jamestown on the York River. And just wait for the Royal Navy. And the Royal Navy is going to come down, pick him up. He'll probably go back to New York. The British are going to have to reevaluate everything. This is such a massive setback, admitting total failure of their strategy. They didn't lose any real battles per se, any big ones. They won the two big ones, but lost the war. Well, the British are still up here in New York, and Washington is here. Keeping an eye on it. And Washington hears about this and comes up with a great idea. He and Rochambeau came up with a plan. fake an attack on New York. Keep the British in New York. And then run down to Yorktown. Maybe we can bottle Cornwallis up. He, actually, this was a great gamble. Washington called it rolling the die. Gamble. If he can trap Cornwallis, he might be able to win the whole thing. And they marched to Yorktown. Now, half of his men are Continental Army with you, whatever rags they happen to have on. And the British wore night, and the French marched, better trained, better disciplined. But they're gonna need a lot of French help. And here are the French marching down. The French have kind of tan and white uniforms. This is supposedly the Continental Army stylized picture. They're wearing rags. Okay, a little bit left to finish tomorrow. We do the treaty. Talk about Washington's reading glasses. Bring your review list. I'll tell you how you keep uniforms clean on the march. Put everything in there. Last chance for the test tomorrow. Easy. Have a good day, everybody.
No, I really don't.
Play. Bye. Yes.
Good in your free time.
Oh, good with the French. Very good. I didn't notice you. What goes on? What's on?
Oh, I know.
Thanks. Off the wall. Huh? Yes? Well played. Misty. Misty. Misty.
Yes.
Oh, well done. Oh, well done. It's almost too good. Right? Yes.
Did you get a good grade? I was like, oh, there. I said it.
Terrible. I'm trying to. Bring me tomorrow.
Oh, that is coming in now.
Oh. Thank you.
I saw it.
You see?
That's still here.
Awesome.
I saw it.
It's just fun right at the end. No, 197. Yes. And then he's got.
Yeah, everybody looks like hated me.